Hi, my name is Ashley Rodriguez. I'm a reporter with Quartz, and I cover what we call glass. It's essentially an argument that media are best understood today as competition for our attention on screens that are connected to the internet. But these screens are no longer flat, right? We have apps like Snapchat and Pokemon Go that have become cultural touchstones by overlaying a virtual world on top of our reality. Through augmented reality, we have virtual reality experiences that have immersed us in new worlds, and we have 360-degree video that has allowed us to see sports, nature, and parts of the world in ways we've never known before. But how useful are all of these emerging formats for marketers, and where is all of this headed? I'm here today with 4 experts in the marketing space who deal with this stuff every day and can help us answer these questions. To my right is TJ Vitolo, who's the Chief Commercialization Officer at OS Environment. I have Ian Busching, who's actually to the right of Mia over here, who is at Dig Down Media, who also helps create live stream and 360-degree video experiences. Mia Tramz recently entered a new role at Time. She's now the editorial director of enterprise and emerging and immersive experiences. And on the end, we have John Penn, who's with InspireVR, who's also been working with immersive video experiences for quite a while. So Ian, why don't we start with you?
Sure.
At F8 last week, Facebook unveiled new tools that allow marketers to essentially bring ads into our cameras. So you may be walking down the street, you hold up your camera to a wall, and suddenly you can see an ad for Coca-Cola pop up, right? In Facebook's view, we're all just walking around with our cameras open, waiting for ads to appear to us. But how is this technology actually being used by consumers today? If you could just talk us through some of the touch points.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm sure Facebook would love it if that was the truth, but I don't think we're quite there yet. We've got, though, a ton of new emerging immersive media technologies that people are actively using today, ranging from 360 video, which integrates directly into Facebook Live, YouTube, and other live streaming platforms, to video game headsets, and then AR, which obviously you touched on, things like Pokemon Go, but we found use cases across pretty much every industry for immersive media. To kind of touch on a couple of them, Amazon recently integrated within their new shopping app. They have AR mode, so you can place a couch in your room and see what it looks like before you purchase it. From experiences like the Star Wars experience down in Florida, where you put a headset on and you are entered into a room where you're now physically interacting with real-world devices like Star Wars blaster or opening up a door, but you're doing it in virtual reality in an enclosed space. So that would be kind of the range of active today experiences that people are getting involved in.
So we have companies creating a lot of these experiences, but who's the actual audience for this stuff? Mia, you working with Time, you deal with very consumer-facing brands. What have you found?
So I really approach both of these technologies in the same way that I would video or photography or text or any of the different mediums that we work across. The people who will engage with them are the people that we make them for. So for example, we made an experience, almost 2 years ago now, called Remembering Pearl Harbor. It was an educational and historical virtual reality experience that was meant to teach you about that moment in history and take you back to that time in as realistic of a way as we possibly could. We launched it for the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor in 2016. And we partnered with 2 museums, the Newseum in Washington, D.C., and the Intrepid here in New York, and brought it to their visitors on the day and then the following days around the anniversary. And I'll tell you, we had people of all age ranges. We had made it purposefully to be age appropriate for a younger audience, but we also wanted to get every single thing right so that if you were a veteran, you could go into that experience and say, yes, they nailed it. This is exactly what it was like to be there. And we succeeded in doing that. We had everything from 13-year-old kids who really didn't know much about that moment in history that came out learning more, to veterans who had been there or had been active at that time. that saw it and said, you've really commemorated what my experience was in a very realistic way. So, I think looking at these as like newfangled technologies that certain generations or certain demographics can't get into is not, the most. I think you won't get very far if you're looking at it that way. I would really encourage people to look at it as who are you trying to reach and what is the experience that's appropriate for them. Just one other quick anecdote I'll share is I produced Time's first AR issue of which was our optimism issue. It was guest edited by Bill Gates. We worked on that with TJ's team. And we did a cover activation that allowed users to see an animated infographic that told them more about our cover subject, which was not anything that we got into in the magazine. It was the only place you could get that information. And we received many letters about that particular AR activation, but one in particular from a grandmother in Texas who wrote to us telling us how she had showed it to her grandsons, not the other way around, and how much she appreciated the content, how engaging she found it to be, and how important she felt it was for her to share that experience with her grandkids.
What was the goal for you from a business standpoint with a project like that?
For us, with both VR and AR, it's been important to be early players in the space to really understand the technology, how to tell stories in it. The learning curve is high. We wanted to get in there early and really, have the space to do some trial and error, have the space to learn a bit. And I think we have a pretty good handle on the two technologies now. We know when we want to deploy them and when we don't. We know what particular use cases it's good for, and that's going to be different for every company.
John, I know you've worked with a lot of different industries. How are you seeing marketers approach this? Is it a lot of, we're trying to get familiar with this, we're trying to learn what works best for our company, or are these experiences actually driving sales, hitting on KPIs, whatever's important to the business?
Well, there's different ways different customers who are targeting different audiences approach this, and it really depends on how much experience that they've had with other technologies and their approach to technologies in general. Mostly what we've found is some organizations like to start off experimenting with the technology, and this is something I would encourage with most companies, that you don't have to wait for a big event or contract to come up for a marketing experience. You can start experimenting with these technologies today because they're accessible on both iOS and Android phones, and also both from the acquisition of the content, which may be cameras or even something that you're trying to build an experience. Your iPhone has what they call AR Kit. Your Android phone has AR Core, and these are technologies that are being available to both consumers and marketers, mostly developers at this particular time, to be able to begin getting their feet wet in terms of building experiences. A lot of times what I've seen is that marketers haven't actually spent a lot of time experiencing the content themselves. So I would say if you really want to get an idea on what your target audience may feel is start getting your feet wet, start experiencing and putting the headsets on, or getting on your smartphone, iPad, and experiencing the technology from a consumer perspective. So the immersiveness of just trying to get started is something that I encourage. But what I found for organizations that are really serious is that they have some pretty more technical questions on how can we apply this technology to this particular campaign experience. And at that particular point, the first question I ask them is, is this experience that you're trying to put together for your customer, what are your goals? The same type of marketing approach that we use. And what are you trying to accomplish this? Is this particular experience that you're trying to put together something that would even make sense for AR or VR experience? So we really try to kind of flesh out the use cases up front and make sure that whatever technology they're thinking about adopting, that it maps pretty well with the goals and the experiences that their customer wants to get.
Have you ever dissuaded someone from using a VR or AR because it just didn't seem to make sense for their business?
I haven't gotten to the point where it's something that, I don't think this will work for your particular business, and maybe you should think about, 2D or more traditional approach. But what I have experienced is kind of help them tease out, what in their campaign would make an engaging experience for the end user. Kind of brainstorming sessions, sessions where we sit down and do planning, and most of all, it's such an experimental technology and developmental stage at this particular point, where you might be able to, find that campaign may have a different twist if you think about it in the way that your users would experience it. So, yeah.
And TJ, I know a lot of the times when we talk about AR and VR, we talk about some of these flashier experiences that happen, on site at Comic-Con or something like that. But you found some really interesting use cases more behind the scenes, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So particularly, we've been working with brands and agencies on the marketing front, but also with brands, companies, and enterprises on the operations front. So using augmented reality as a tool to help with operational efficiency, cost reduction, and other aspects of helping the internal organizations or businesses run better. And so being that our organization is part of Verizon and 140,000 plus employees, we've got the benefit of building out case study and experiences internally across the board with our PR groups, our internal communications groups, our retail organizations, our network operations organizations. And some of the experiences that we've been building on the augmented reality front are ones where internally most headquarters have posters and banners up against the wall. Hey, check out the first quarter results. You have to go back to your laptop and check out the first quarter results. Well, all of our employees have a common application across the board. They hold up their phone to any of those posters that you see around the office or in the retail space, and it'll activate content that's associated with that.
And when they're doing that, they're just holding up their, what app are they using to
We have an internal employee app, right? And so we're also doing it for employee communications purposes. We have an interesting use case for AR in network operations, where we, in our data centers, are using augmented reality to navigate through our data centers and to identify certain server and rack space where a work order or a ticket has been placed. So a tech rep will go out to a facility, navigate to that specific location, hold their phone up to that rack, and see where they have to install that piece of equipment. And so the net of it is outside of the marketing use cases and the things that we're focused on in helping marketers drive positive experiences, good return on investment. We're also helping enterprises internally understand how augmented reality can be applied for cost savings and efficiency purposes.
And Ian, I know we were having a conversation a little bit earlier about a wine company that had used VR to actually get people excited about their labels and the different types of wines they had. Can you talk a little bit about some of the industries that maybe kind of lend themselves naturally to AR and VR?
Yeah, absolutely. I think outside of, I think for most industries there is an application, whether it be in training or healthcare, education, but focusing on consumer or facing industries. I would say retail is huge. Mm-hmm. Snapchat already has, everyone is using their filters and little 3D Bitmojis dancing on the table. But when they integrate that with shopping and trying on a new piece of clothing or a hat, it seems like a natural fit. As far as VR, I think that gaming is obviously the biggest sector there. I feel like there's a lot of growth in that area, whereas some of the other places we've seen the adoption has been slower. But as far as education and being able to translate information, and also empathy is a huge thing that we see within the VR space. And when you are able to experience something, if you're trying to communicate a message, you can do so very effectively when you have their whole attention. As far as other industries, you've got the restaurant industry. You can figure out what you want to order before you order it, see what it looks like, manipulate that in space. Real estate. We've got programs like Matterhorn, which is a combination of 3D modeling and augmented or VR technologies, kind of like a walkthrough. Navigation, we were just talking about a few moments ago. Google is now, we all have used Google Maps before, and we see Street View, which is 360 photo. But when you take that to the next level and add a layer of augmented reality, you can now actually see pathfinding and where you need to stop or want to stop. Potentially say, I'm walking down the street and I want to find a coffee, and it can say, hey, it's right here. You can find that coffee 2 blocks on the left. So I think those are some of the areas where we've already seen app development, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more within that space.
Can I get a sense here from the audience of how many people are currently creating their own VR experiences or thinking about doing so? Okay, so many of you are kind of considering getting into this space. I think one of the challenges for folks is there are so many different ways to reach audiences the way that media has been fragmented, right? So what's the incentive to put money and resources to something like AR and VR versus something like social media that just has a much broader scale? And I'll pose this to the panel more generally to anyone who wants to answer this.
In our case, I know we recently did the Winter Classic 360 video for the NHL and NBC Sports, and the response was tremendous. We had over 850,000 views in 24 hours, over 60% engagement rate, and over 2 times their average views on video. So for us, we go out and show that to them and say, we're creating content that adds value to your traditional broadcast, and now you're bringing viewers from Facebook into your live broadcast. So now they're tuning into another element that they can see. We put this out live, or actually pseudo live during the game, so that they could start drawing people in off that audience. And then it continues the conversation online as well. But it's important to have content that fits with what you're trying to achieve. So for instance, with 360 video, just doing 360 video isn't enough. It needs to make sense for the product that you're trying to put out to the public. But that's one area for us.
Yeah, I think Mia put it best when I think for a lot of brands and what Time and Meredith does is they try to get ahead of the curve in terms of technology. And what we've been focused on as an organization starting back in 2016 is that we found the biggest barriers of entry for brands and marketers were essentially cost and understanding how to use the technology. Mm-hmm. And so what we've been focused on with our clients essentially is to drive positive ROI in a marketing standpoint. So while most people think new technologies are costly, we've been focused on institutionalizing augmented reality development with tools that allow brands, marketers, and agencies to create augmented reality experiences with very little cost, so they get to experiment.
So they don't need to build everything from scratch. You have the bases there for them.
Correct, yeah. Simple tool, build augmented reality experience, a few clicks, and then embed it into your application, you're off and running. And so you get the opportunity now for very little cost to try to develop augmented reality experiences. Then what we couple with that are specific vertical use cases for those. So are you a retailer? Are you a creative agency? What are those different use cases you can apply augmented reality to? So we take a lot of the math out of the equation for figuring out how to use augmented reality, and we take cost out of the equation. And if you could do that, you could do that well, and you could experiment, then you'll see what works for your audiences. You'll drive engagement, and then you'll be ahead of the curve when your competitors are trying to play catch up from an augmented reality, virtual reality standpoint.
From all of your experience, is cost and sort of the barrier entry from a production standpoint like the biggest challenge you're seeing as well?
From a production standpoint, the price, there's no standardization in the industry, so like TJ was saying, you have to always be specific to your use case and specific to your audience. In my case, we have enterprise and hospitals that actually want to get not only using VR in the OR for their medical students in education and training, but also from a marketing standpoint because hospitals have to compete with other hospital systems as well. In our hometown, we have large hospitals, Wellstar, and their biggest competition, they have to be at the forefront in terms of their advertising. So they want to be able to give their users the experience. What is it like being in a hospital from the beginning when they check in all the way through the operational procedure all the way to release? And if you can actually lower that that concern from a patient standpoint of view early on with the VR experience, that gets customers a little more comfortable with something that would be a large hospital system. That's one of the use cases that we're seeing.
I would say I've looked at it more as placing strategic bets when it comes to budgeting around these things. I feel like, whether you're a media publisher or a marketer, you know the audience you're trying to reach, you know what they're going to respond to and what they won't respond to. So when I was first brought on to Life VR, which was the role I had before I just came back to Time recently, the original proposition was to create a high volume of 360 experiences.
And this was across all of Meredith's brands?
All of Meredith's brands, so Time, but also Sports Illustrated, People, Entertainment Weekly, Travel and Leisure. And they wanted me to basically come up with an editorial slate where we were pumping out 360 video experiences in high volume. And I basically said, if that's what you want me to do with this role, I won't take it, because we will not succeed that way. There's not a large enough audience to be watching that much video. You're going to be throwing your money out the window. What would be a much better approach that I will sign on for is picking really, really ambitious projects that when people come across them in their daily lives, they have to watch. They are so compelled by what the project is, they will go through whatever hoops are necessary on the technological side to see them. And that's what I was allowed to do, and that's where we found success. So, you know, instead of creating a bunch of 360, you know, basketball videos for SI, we created a project called Capturing Everest, which was the first bottom to top climb of Everest in VR, and we just won an Emmy with it last night. So we've kind of,
Congratulations.
thank you. We've tried to choose these projects where if you came across them in social media, or if you heard about them from a friend, you're like, oh my God, I have to see what that is. And that's, I mean, whether you're a publishing company or marketing a product, that's incredibly powerful, I think, you know, that people are compelled not only to engage with the story, but then tell other people that they have to watch it too. And that's been our sweet spot. That's where we live with these two technologies.
And we're in a world where, you know, brands and advertisers have seconds oftentimes to capture an audience's attention, right? How do you tell story, and how do you keep the audience focused in something like a 360-degree video experience where they can really look wherever they want, and or virtual reality where they can maybe go wherever they want?
There's a bunch of ways to answer that question. There's a bunch of formats also that fall within the question that you're asking. So on the low end, you have 360 video, where you really are capturing something that's happening, and your viewer is at kind of a fixed point looking at a sphere of content around them. On the higher end, which is much more expensive if you're talking about production budgets, you have experiences that are completely CGI. They're built in a game engine similar to a video game, but you're telling a narrative story using those same kind of tools. And you have a lot more control if you're doing you know, something that's built in a game engine that is CGI. In terms of guiding your user, you have a lot more ability to give them an interactive experience. It's more akin to what people imagine virtual reality would look and feel like if they have never experienced it before. With 360 video, you're sort of at the mercy of whatever it is you're capturing, and it's a lot harder to direct gaze and attention in that medium. There's a bunch of different use cases for both, and I think what you have to look at is, what is the story I'm trying to tell, what's the kind of engagement I'm trying to drive, and what is the format within VR or AR that makes sense for that. I can give you two quick examples. One is we've created 3 travel guides for travel and leisure, and this is huge in the travel industry. A lot of hotels that, you know, Travel and Leisure works with as clients, wineries have created these kind of VR travel guides. They work great in 360. People want to look all around. They don't necessarily want to have their attention focused on one particular thing, and you're not threading a narrative line where if someone misses something, they don't understand what's happening. It's about the vista. It's about having this, you know, all-encompassing gaze. Whereas with the Pearl Harbor piece, we had a really specific narrative that we wanted to get you through. So we built it in CGI. It's a really similar post-production process to what you'd see in a high-end film, kind of mashed up with a video game. And we're able, because we've built the environment ourselves, to have a lot of control over how we move you through it. You have the sense of free will, but you also are only given a certain number of options, and we are keeping you on a track throughout the experience. It's more complicated to map out, but the end result is what we wanted for the viewer. You really have the experience of having seen the things you were supposed to see, but also feeling like you got to explore a bit. So I would say, you know, really understand what your end goal is and what it is that you're trying to deliver to the viewer, and I think the format is kind of based on those things.
As you all think about the next, 5 years out, are any of these 3 formats going to become something that advertisers just cannot ignore?
AR for sure.
Yeah, I so kind of wrote a little bit of a novel on this one in the form of PowerPoint presentations to our board. But our view is that that mixed reality is ultimately going to become the interface for the future.
And when you say mixed reality, that's you're using a headset, but then there are also tactile things around? Or?
A combination of
Okay.
things, right? So most of it's focused on glasses, right?
Okay.
And so Verizon, we essentially believe that the next big interface is going to be glasses. So over 5 years, you're going to start to see these devices give way for glasses. Over 10 years, it's going to be all glasses at the next interface. And the reason for that and why we see that is a couple things. And we'll get into why I think advertising is going to fall into that space. But most people have heard about 5G, 5G specifically bringing lots of bandwidth and to some extent low latency people have heard about. But one of the biggest architectural elements and important elements of 5G is a component called mobile edge compute. And what that allows for is essentially the offloading of processing power from those glasses to the network edge. And what that means is that over time, those glasses, what you see today, like Vuzix and stuff to that extent, are going to become extremely small and lightweight. So you're going to have a real pair of glasses that are now mixed reality glasses. And so what that's going to do is essentially build a whole entire ecosystem of mobile applications for those glasses. In just the same way that advertisers monetize and show advertisements on mobile today, will also be built into mixed reality. So we'll use an example of, let's say, navigation in mixed reality with glasses. You're walking down New York City, you're looking for a restaurant, whatever else might be the case. If you're layering an app for navigation, you also have digital advertisements that pop up as you walk past other places. Or for instance, I'll use a silly example, but maybe you're in the park throwing Frisbee with your dog and you download a mixed reality application where you want to see where that Frisbee lands or how fast is it going or how far is it going. Maybe off to your left you see a mixed reality dog that's eating a bowl of puppy chow, right? If you're looking to build free applications and implement them into this ecosystem, you're going to naturally build in digital advertising. And so for us, we feel that with glasses, you're going to build a very similar paradigm of mobile apps that you do on smartphone with a very similar paradigm of integrated embedded advertising, but in a new, unique, interesting way.
Do you think this is going to get to the point like display advertising today where we just kind of have things in the sidebar that are happening around us and we block them out sometimes or ad block them if we actually can?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, there was a company called Layer years back that kind of layered on different augmented reality experiences. You got to choose this experience, and as part of that, there were these augmented ads that sort of came up in that. And I think it's going to be user choice at the end of the day, right? So if you are using a navigation app or if you're using this dog park app or whatever else might be the case, you're going to get a certain set of applications or ads that are embedded in there. And they'll probably be hosted by, some DSP that will embed those applications in there. But I think there's probably going to be some level of saturation, just like you have in mobile applications today, where people will just not use an application because there's so much digital advertising. So you need to find that finite balance between good advertising, natural advertising that exists within the mixed reality space, and something that's overwhelming.
What you're describing is very personal, right? It's on your face. You're experiencing this throughout your day as you're looking at the world. How much do you think consumers are going to accept advertising in that environment?
I think they'll accept it just as much as they do with mobile applications at Facebook, right? And so, Facebook continually pushes the limit in how much sponsored content they place into a feed relative to your natural content. And, they deploy at any point in time over 500 different variations of their application, continually sampling the audience's threshold for advertisements within that feed. And so I think what you'll see is just that natural give and take of how much advertising can you place into that mixed reality experience before it becomes too burdensome from a consumer standpoint.
And what about the rest of the panel? If you guys were writing, a science fiction short story, what would the ideal marketing tool using these kind of immersive experiences be in the coming years?
I have a little thing to kind of separate, because I think we're talking about so many different versions of augmented virtual reality that you kind of have to separate, what TJ was talking about, being augmented reality, using it as a tool. Like when you mentioned the word navigation, we all use navigation as a tool, but we don't use virtual reality, augmented reality experiences particularly as a tool. I think augmented reality leads itself more to a tool, where virtual reality and even 360 to a point leads itself more to immersive, more narrative experiences. So I think they kind of have different roles in the users, what they want to be able to do. So I think for a navigation type experience, it may be more acceptable to have other ads pop up because it lends itself more to a tool, and tools make people's experience better in that particular situation. But say for VR and 360, where you can start to tell a story or have the user wants to experience a particular scene or whatever that experience is on their own, I think advertising takes a different role in that particular case. So maybe they would have a little more pushback and maybe should be more of a sponsorship model for the experiences they want to experience in 360 and VR versus, say, augmented reality. So I think once marketers start to begin to see how these different technologies can be used in these different categories that I've tried to separate a little bit, I think advertising would take a different meaning. And to build also on TJ, each technology like mobile, that augmented reality is obviously building on the mobile experience. So in that case, I really think he's right on the money that people will have a tendency to have the same tolerance in that particular use case. But say an advertisement right in the middle of an immersive movie experience, not so much.
Right.
So I think we got to start thinking about, the technology and how it's being used. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful about how we insert advertising into things like augmented reality. I think particularly younger generation have a stronger aversion to a lot of this. And if done in the wrong way or just in a way that leaves a distaste in the mouth of the person who's consuming it, then they're not going to come back to it. So you need to go at it carefully and kind of understand where your viewership is coming from before we start to add in. I think as far as the ideal opportune augmented reality platform or something that we could look forward to, that would be one where you provide an experience to the viewer that makes them want to use your product or service. So you're adding value for something that you're already doing, rather than trying to just slap a Coke logo on the wall. This is like, hey, I have this object that I do care about, and now because I can interact with it in a virtual world, that makes me have even a stronger attraction to it or a connection with that brand.
I think VR gives us a chance to, in augmented reality, for the advertiser to actually think of new ways that they can actually enhance the user experience. It may not be, an ad pop-up in the middle of the experience. It could be something more benign, like ad placement. And I think there's ideas that marketers and ad tech companies that are developing in this space can actually start to iterate new ways of reaching the user, maybe more of an ad environment that doesn't get in the way of what they came to see, would be a good idea, a good experience. Like if you came to see a basketball game, just like you see today where they have the advertising around the arena, those same things in augmented reality is already happening on television, can also happen within an immersive experience. So I think advertisers have to be smart and use the tools, begin to experiment, and see what really works to actually enhance the user experience as opposed to get in the way of it.
And that can be part of that layer. So when you're watching a baseball game or a golf and you see the golf tracker and you see the shot, well, now you can put on glasses and add value, but it's also sponsored by so forth and so on.
Sure. Yeah.
So it sounds like advertisers are going to have to get a lot more creative in how they think about all these things. It's not just fitting into a format and display ad anymore, or a 6-second video or whatever it may be.
Right.
Yeah, it's how Facebook revolutionized really the sponsored piece of content, right? Is that the content looks almost like anything else that comes into your newsfeed. It's just natural, organic. And so you have to take that same approach with mixed reality, virtual reality, where it becomes an organic ad within that experience where it's so passive that you're sort of subconsciously registering that versus like, it's in my face, I want to exit out and get back to my content. So.
And I do want to leave some time for questions. Does anyone have a question for the panel? Yes.
Quick question. We've talked a lot about the content creation in terms of in the VR, AR space. Do you find that the means of consumption of that content is on par with the production of the content?
I think it really depends on the distribution model you come up with on your own. So for example, you know, with experiences like Remembering Pearl Harbor, we did a similar experience with Buzz Aldrin where we created a VR hologram of him and you get to travel with him from the moon to Mars. From the beginning, our intention was to partner with museums to bring those experiences to their audiences. And I think similarly, you know, a lot of the best VR experiences I've seen in terms of engagement have been, you know, at experiential events. So, you know, whether it's South by Southwest or, you know, partnering with, you know, a public-facing location and installing there either temporarily or, you know, even Nat Geo has done these really amazing immersive kind of like traveling pop-up experiences. I feel like if you build that distribution model into your plan, you'll have as much engagement as you want. If you put these things into public spaces and make them, you know, accessible, people will line up out the door to try them out. That's not the issue. I think if you're relying on people when it comes to VR to watch at home, you will be disappointed with the results. When it comes to AR, totally different story. Everybody has a phone. You just either need to plug into an existing app, leverage Snapchat, leverage Facebook, or, you know, if you have the ability to launch a standalone app in a big way and you think that there will be engagement there, the friction level is much lower.
Mm-hmm.
The work you did for the Winter Classic, was it like a fixed point viewing for the broadcast, or was it just a partial thing of experience for the actual game itself?
So for the Winter Classic, we had 4 cameras set up, and we had kind of some roving cameras. So we had a camera in the locker room. We had some on the actual ice attached to the boards and things like that. What we found was most engaging, though, is when you could provide something that you couldn't see on the traditional broadcast. So being inside the locker room when they're getting dressed and being able to look around the room at your favorite player, or, you know, see 2 guys that normally, you know, didn't like each other interacting because it's, you know, the All-Star game or whatever, you can find out, you can add value to the broadcast. But when you're just shooting, you know, straight ahead, then we already have video cameras. So it's important that we focus on adding to the experience for the viewer that they weren't going to get by turning on the television. And we were hoping they were going to, and we want them to do this side by side. So, you know, NBC obviously wants to drive as many people to watch the broadcast as possible, but we want to continue that conversation online. So we need to add something beyond just what you saw during, you know, the 3 periods.
I think to add to that, going back to that idea of like creating something that your audience wants, we produced 2 live streams of the solar eclipse for Time last year. One was in 360 and one was 2D. And we know that people love space content from Time. That's just what our audience wants. So when we are able to plug into an event like that, which is once in a lifetime, we know we're going to get a big audience. For that particular moment, a 360 video made a lot of sense. You want to see everything you want to see the weird crowds that have gathered, you want to see the whole sky, you want to feel like you have a sense of immersion. And in that case, our 360 live stream outperformed the 2D live stream many, many, many times over. It was the most watched live stream we've ever published to Time's YouTube channel, 360, 2D, or otherwise. So I think, again, being smart about where you apply these technologies and knowing what your audience wants and when it wants those things is a big part of the equation. It's not just saying like 360 or VR or AR is good for all circumstances.
I feel like this technology is so advanced that I'm probably just speaking for myself here, that I don't know. In other words, you don't know what you don't know. And there are questions that I probably will want to ask, but, you know, this technology is just so new to me. And I'm interested in it, though. So I wanted to know, are there any resources or white papers or any websites that you recommend for people who are not very familiar with this but want to get interested in it a little bit more educated about it?
There's a lot of meetups for these things. I don't know if you're based in New York or elsewhere, but certainly there's like VR and AR meetups that you can find on Facebook, and I think talking to people is probably the best. Like if you do have questions, I think getting answers to your specific questions is probably better than trying to sift through a bunch of, you know, white papers that maybe don't have to do with your particular use case. Personally, when I was trying to learn about this stuff, I would just cold call people. I'd cold call VR, production houses or agencies that did this stuff and ask them all my questions, or say like, this is a project I'm interested in doing, can I talk through it with your team? And I think you'll probably be able to find some people in your city that would be willing to do that. But other than that, I would also say, trying to watch some of this stuff, downloading AR apps, using, Instagram stories and Snapchat, looking at, even on cardboard, some VR experiences, and finding things that you like, and then looking at who produced those and maybe reaching out to them and saying, hey, I saw this thing that you did that I really, sparked some interest for me. Can I talk to you about how you made it? And I think, having a dialogue for me has been a lot more helpful than reading anything about either of the technologies, especially because they're moving so fast.
Yeah, I don't think you can replace like hands-on experience. Putting a VR headset on, using the glasses, to be able to actually experience it, it all starts to make sense like much quicker than trying to read about, how the technology is being applied. So I always recommend for people to definitely try as many different experiences as they can. And then you'll see what works and what doesn't, because some of them really don't.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, they really missed the mark on this. And then other ones are really compelling. I mean, when it's done right, it can be absolutely amazing. But there's often, it requires a lot of thought and care to put together high quality material. And it can't just, turn over like that. The tools to make it are going to make these things very simple. But the creative still needs to be there. I can shoot in 4K, but that doesn't mean that we're going to win an Emmy for my acting. So.
And where do you guys look for these experiences?
Well, I would say for VR stuff, I know the headset investment is like a huge thing. There are a lot of VR arcades now. I don't know how many there are in DC, but certainly in New York, there's at least 2 or 3 where you could go in and try every single headset. You pay like a fixed fee for an hour or however long you want to be there. And they'll have people guide you around and show you how all the different headsets work, and you can try a bunch of different experiences. But cardboard is a really good place to start. You can buy a cardboard headset on Amazon for like $10. You can download infinite cardboard VR apps and watch a bunch of 360 content. It's a good starting point. There's a lot of museums that are starting to do VR exhibitions that you can go see. I know in DC there's a few of them. And then for AR, you can just download any AR application on your phone and start, checking out how that works.
I would say the last few years, the industry's been going through a developer period, and people who are early adopters have gotten on board looking at the developer tools, whether it be headsets or cameras. But you're going to see in 2018 a big shift to where Oculus Go just got released. Samsung Focus releases in the 3rd quarter, where you have standalone headsets that as easy as putting on a headset, downloading an app, and looking at the experience, and it's at a price point that is not $500, $700, $800. Oculus Go, $199, and I'm not trying to just tout them, but that's going to be the trend. It's going to be much more accessible at that price point for you to try an experience without feeling as though you have to really decide whether you should pay the rent or not. And also, you're not having to have a PC in tow. These are all-in-one units, what we call all-in-one, totally wireless, and it'll make it a lot easier. And I would encourage folks to go and try these, what I call 2nd and 3rd generation headsets, because it will give you a better experience than, say, cardboard. Cardboard's a great place to start, but I feel as though people who started on a cardboard thought that was all virtual reality had to give, and say Samsung Gear VR would have been a little bit better place to start with, where it would have been giving you the kind of experience that we as creators or as technologists or marketers would like for you to start. But I think 2018 is perfect for you to jump in and just kind of experience it as a consumer.
Yeah, and a Gear VR, by the way, just your phone, if you have a modern Samsung phone, it'll just stick into a headset that costs, I think, $100, and then you can use your actual phone to power it. So a lot of people already have the primary piece of hardware in their pocket.
Yeah.
How would you do that? Sorry. Sorry.
Sure, I'm sorry. We have one last question. We're almost out of time, so I just want to make sure we get to you in the back.
Yeah, I appreciate it. One quick question. For those in the content creation space from a B2B standpoint, what does that client acquisition look like? Because it seems to me that it's really the big brands who get it and that's their playing field, but is there a space where others are involved, and what does that look like in terms of acquiring those clients? And I guess kind of educating them to the fact that this is a value add to your marketing, outreach.
Yeah, we've worked with a range of clients. We've worked with several smaller clients that wanted to, particularly in like real estate or space like that, where they want to show a space or they have a particular message that they want to get across, where they felt like 360 was going to be an important medium. As far as AR and VR, the barrier currently is a little higher just because of the development side of it, but that's going to rapidly change. I think you guys are working on some of that stuff, and it's gonna become much more accessible. As far as the acquisition, I mean, it's kind of interesting question because it comes out of everywhere. I think most of the time we find that people either already have this in mind, or there's something where someone kind of has the idea and says, hey, what about, like, maybe it's something we should look into. But it's been kind of across the board.
It depends on also what industry. I've had conversations with a pharmaceutical company, for example, that they're ready to go right now. They're looking for a partner to be able to, produce that content and get it to where it can be distributed. It may be totally different. A hospital may be much longer. They have budgets that come out certain times of the year. So it's almost based on the business models that those industries already operate today. They're going to kind of do the same thing.
I also find with both of these technologies that showing people versus telling them is much more effective. Mm-hmm. So early on, I worked really closely with our sales team to build our go-to-market strategy for both VR and AR. And I called like every headset company and basically just like begged, borrowed, and steal to assemble a VR and AR lab where I could like demonstrate how these things work. And whenever we were talking to a client through our sales team about adding VR, AR to whatever we were pitching them, I would ask that they set aside like 30 or 45 minutes if they were coming to our office to come to the VR lab, and then I would show them everything. I wanted them to have as good of an education as I could give them in that time frame to A, like see the range of possibilities for both technologies, and B, be able to feel like they were making an educated choice. So, I would show them stuff that we had built, I'd show them stuff that other people had done that I thought was really good, and just really make them feel empowered to make a decision if they were going to, consider investing their money into it.
And just, I think, doing us a favor on the panel here as a general plug, if you guys are looking to understand sort of what we're all doing in the space, I'm sure we all have a fair amount of case studies. I know we do around this technology and the clients that we've implemented. So if you get a chance, take a look at our websites. You'll see a lot of the work that we've done in the 360 AR and VR space, what those experiences are like, what the tools and technologies that we've implemented. And then I'm sure all of us have a contact us button. If you want to know more, we host sessions all the time about the things that we offer.
Great. Well, I think that's it for this panel. Thank you all. And thank you to our panelists.